One of my greatest blessings, I can't think of very many that are more than that or better than that, is my relationship with my brother. My brother and I talk every Sabbath. Growing up, we always shared a room. We shared a house for a while. We always knew the same people. We liked doing the same things. We told the same stupid jokes. And even when Tracy will tell you, when we get together, even now, it's like listening to me in stereo. But one thing I can tell you is, my mother was a very sweet, kind woman. But one of the scariest moments was when my brother and I, believe it or not, my brother and I have fought. When my brother and I would fight. She would be so mad, she would be in tears. And her comment, we remember it, I will always remember it. I had you guys to get along. And boy, we got that a lot growing up. And that's one of my favorite things is to watch my boys. They get along really well. Of course, they're typical boys. They're typical brothers. They have their moments, but one of my greatest joys in life is watching them get along. Now, recently, I've been reading the book of Genesis, and with that context in mind, I came to realize the book of Genesis is about dysfunctional sibling relationships. It's loaded with it. So with that in mind, again, I think I'm going to talk about one of the dysfunctional brothers in the book of Genesis. And this man's name is Esau. Now, Esau, obviously, we hear a lot about him growing up in the church, or coming to church, but please turn with me to Genesis 25. Genesis 25. And as we all know, Esau was the older twin brother of Jacob. And as many brothers tend to be, they were very competitive. They were actually competitive right coming out of the chute. And in Genesis 25, and in verse 22, and Rebekah was ready to deliver, but the children, in verse 22, struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire to the Lord, and in verse 23, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples shall be separated from your body, one shall be stronger than the other, and the other shall serve the younger." So when her days were fulfilled, here we go, and in verse 26, when they were born, afterwards his brother came out, this is Jacob, came out after Esau, and he took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old. The boys were fighting in the womb, and even coming out, they were at each other. Now, we all know a couple of the stories, but one of the stories I want to go to is in Genesis 27. Genesis 27, a chapter back, and that's the famous account where Jacob steals Esau's blessing. And in verse 27, and we'll read in verse 3. Now therefore, this is Isaac speaking, "Now therefore, please take your weapon," talking to Esau, "your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and go hunt game for me, and make me savory foods, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." And as we read through the story, Rebekah heard it. And actually, let's go back to 28. There's something else that I forgot to mention. Let's get back to chapter 25. And in verse 28, this is probably what really caused a lot of the problems right from the get-go. "And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob." There's absolutely nothing worse than parents that absolutely play favorites. So let's go back to chapter 27, and let's first drop down to verse 21. And we know that Rebekah helped Jacob set up the stew that Isaac liked to eat. And in verse 21, Jacob comes into Isaac, And Isaac says to Jacob, "Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not." Now, the interesting thing here is that came to my mind was, who knew his sons better than Isaac? Why then would he ask that question? Because he knew his brothers were tricksters. They knew they were always at each other. They were trying to fool each other. And he probably knew that Jacob was known for lying about certain things. So in verse 22, so Jacob went near to Isaac his father, and he felt him. He said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he, Isaac, did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother's hands, so he blessed him. Of course, we read in the story that he put sheepskin on his arms. Now it begs the question, how hairy was that man that your arms were like sheep's hide? I'm not a hairy guy, but there's no way I'm going to be taken for somebody with a sheepskin. But anyway, and we'll go back down to, of course, then he goes and reads the blessing. We've got the blessing for there. And then in verse 41, in verse 37, let's go back to there. "And then Isaac answered, said to Esau, Indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren I have given to him as servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. But shall I go? What shall I do for you now, my son?" And jumping down to verse 41, so Esau hated Jacob because the blessing for which his father blessed him, and Esau said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." At each other from the get-go. Now, to move on, we're going to skip through some of the story, but as we know, Jacob became the great nation of Israel, but also, too, God took care of Esau, and he became the nation of Edom. We all know that, but it mentions it in Deuteronomy 36 and verse 1. But there's another example when Edom, or Esau, comes back on the scene. He kind of disappears for a while, and they come back on the scene in Deuteronomy 2. This is during the Exodus, Deuteronomy 2, and in verse 1. And Moses is reciting the story to Israel, and in verse 1, chapter 2, "Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea, as the Lord spoke to me, and we skirted Mount Seir for many days. And the Lord said to me, saying, You have skirted the mountains long enough, turn northward, and command the people, saying, You are about to pass through the territory of your brother, the descendants of Esau, who live in Mount Seir, and they will be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourself carefully. Do not meddle with them." We could rephrase that. Don't pester them. Don't bother your brother. Don't pick on him. Leave him be. Do not meddle, in verse 5, "Do not meddle with him, for I will not give you any of their land, no, not so much as one footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. You shall buy food from them with money that you may eat, and you shall also buy water from them that they may drink." And now if we would jump down into verse 20, or Numbers 20, but in Numbers 20, it's where this story took place. The king of Edom refused passage. Did not allow Israel to go through the kingdom of Edom. This is actually significant because it's not the only time it happened. In the same case, Ammon, his cousin, and Moab, Israel's cousin, also refused. But in Deuteronomy 23, let's jump down there because there's something I find very significant. Deuteronomy 23. And in verse 3, and Ammon and Moab shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of the descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread of water on the road. And then jump down into verse 7. You shall not abhor Edom, for he is your brother. Now, the significance that I'd like to take out of here is this. The Lord places a great significance on the sibling brother relationship. No matter what, you are to stick close to, not bother, not pick on, not fight your brother. Here in that context, it looks like cousins are a different story, but I'm not going there. My point here is, despite the fact that Edom did not help them, they were not to abuse, they were not to abhor or hold a grudge against Esau, their brother. Now, there are times that, after this, they also disappear from the scene, but they show up a couple extra times through Kings and Chronicles and Samuel. But through the entire time, they tend to be in an adversarial relation. Edom tends to be in an adversarial relationship with Israel. One of the classic examples was in 2 Chronicles. Where did I write it down? In 2 Chronicles 20, and that's when Edom, Ammon, and Moab all came to fight against Judah, King Jehoshaphat, and the Lord destroyed the armies. But the thing that's significant on this one is what happened after that. Historians tend to believe, scholars also tend to believe, that when Edom assisted Nebuchadnezzar when Babylon came in to overthrow Judah in 587 BC. Is that important? Absolutely, that's important. And hence we have the book of Obadiah. So turn over to the book of Obadiah. Now that is an interesting one, and for those who don't know where it is or have trouble finding it, it is just before the book of Jonah and after the book of Amos. In the book of Obadiah, the prophecy of Obadiah is against Edom. Now the thing that's significant here is God has a few harsh words for Edom. And in that day, in verse 11, you stood on the other side. In that day, the strangers carried captive his forces when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem. Even you were one of them. But you should not have gazed on the day of your brother in the day of captivity. Nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of their distress. And he keeps going on. Now, a lot of scholars believe, and this is true, that they reference this as why they helped Nebuchadnezzar. But as we know, prophecy, as we've been taught in the church, prophecy is twofold. There's always a dual application. So that begs the question, where is Edom today? Where is Esau today? History or historians, I read an article where somebody said, well, they got dissolved into history. Their DNA is just kind of poof, gone and absorbed in everybody else. I don't buy it. I've heard the church for years gone by saying that Edom or Esau today is now modern day Turkey. I don't know that. There is really no proof of that. The bottom line is it doesn't matter if they're Turkey. It doesn't matter who they are. All we do know, and all that's obvious, is that Edom is one of the countries that absolutely hates Israel, modern day Israel, and the United States of America. If that weren't true, we would not have the book of Obadiah. So, what is the takeaway from all of this? The takeaway is this. Was Esau wrong for being mad at his brother Jacob? Absolutely. In my mind, absolutely he was right for being mad at his brother Jacob. He got jilted numerous times by him. But 4,000 years? Holding a grudge for 4,000 years? It's a little bit extreme. But despite Jacob and Esau having a very dysfunctional relationship, I find it particularly interesting how God puts a great deal of importance on the sibling relationships. He expects brothers to get along. I have to get along with my brother. But what's also the point here? Who else is my brother? Everybody in the church, right? Hence we have in 1 John, if a man says, I love God, but you hate your brother, the truth is not in you. Your relationship with your siblings, your relationship with your spiritual brothers does matter. No matter what, God does expect us, to get along with our brothers and our siblings.